The assessment of the athlete. Well, what is their training status? And this is hugely important. And sometimes people overlook this, that this is where everybody's starting. Well, what have they done before? What was the type of training program that they'd done previously? Maybe they've been training for 6 years and they're coming to you and you're Olympic based, and the previous program was a high intensity base, machine based training. Well, they aren't coming in as a 6 year training person, they're coming in as a newbie. You need to look at the length of recent regular participation in previous training programs, the level of intensity involved in the previous training programs. They might be really strong, but they don't have the coordination. The degree of exercise technique experience. While they might have a 700-pound squat, maybe they have never cleaned before, so they're going to be new in that a beginner status on that type of exercise. Where they can push some other things, they really need to take it slow and learn the technique on some of the new exercises for them. So here is a table that just kind of gives you an idea of where somebody is and what kind of training they would be doing from there on in. So the NFCA has athletes categorized into beginner, intermediate, and advanced. With the beginner, it's somebody who is untrained, or what are they currently doing? Well, it's either that if they're untrained, they haven't been training, or maybe they've just begun training. Less than 2 months is a training age for that. Whenever you get started with them, it only takes 1 to 2 per week to really get somebody moving in the appropriate direction. What kind of training stress have they done, and will they be doing? How much stress does it take to cause a positive adaptation? I often joke that a beginner will simply look at a barbell and get stronger, and it's not too far off the mark. So realize that you don't have to do much to cause a significant improvement with a beginner or untrained person. Uh, a lot of times you'll see coaches think that they're extremely intelligent and absolute geniuses because they may not know what they're doing, but they get somebody who's never trained before and they put 100 pounds on their bench press. Well, they might have had 150 to 200 pounds on their bench press if they actually would have known what they were doing. Were those gains because of or in spite of the program, especially when dealing with beginners? Their technique, experience, and skill, it's either none or minimal. Quite frankly, you always want to fall on the side of underestimating somebody's technique rather than overestimating, especially when they first start training with you. The intermediate or moderately resistance trained. Well, they are currently training. They've probably been training 2 to 6 months seriously. 2 to 3 times per week is the frequency that is going to elicit good adaptations for them. And medium training stress. And what do we mean training stress? Just in case I didn't mention that, it's looking at how hard are you trying to push somebody. Um, with the technique, experience, and the skill, they're typically at basic. They're going to understand how to do pulls. They should probably understand how to squat, press, with a pretty decent proficiency. But you're not going to be doing split clean to clean jerk, or clean to split jerk, or exercises that are more advanced like that. An advanced training status is somebody who's well trained. They're currently training. They've been doing it more than a year. Typically, they're going to be needing 3 to 4 sessions per week with high training stresses, and they're going to be able to handle the more intense uh, exercises and more advanced exercise techniques. So, why? Because they are building upon a better foundation. With athletes, I typically always treat them as the intermediate for the most part because while they may train a couple of years, a lot of times they're going to be going away from you for significant periods, a month over the Christmas vacation when dealing with a college athlete. Over the summer, you may be fortunate and have athletes the entire summer. You may be unfortunate and not have the athletes for any period of time. So, whenever they are away from you entirely, typically they're going to detrain. You may have some great athletes who go and do things on their own, um, but more often than not, you're going to have athletes that if they go do train and they do work out, a lot of times they're not doing things as intensely as you would like them to. So whenever they come back, experiencing a high training stress will tend to overtrain them. The needs analysis. What is the assessment of the athlete? The physical testing and evaluation, it should relate to the athlete's sport. If you're trying to test the sport of football, where aerobic capacity is not that huge of a necessity, testing a 3 mile might not be that great for them. It won't have any impact on their playing ability, whereas maybe a 10 time or a 20 time or a change of direction test or a standing long jump would be huge. Use the results of the movement analysis to select tests. So what movements are done within the sport? What planes of movement are in there? Do they have change of direction? Is it track where all they have to do is run fast and lean left or jump or throw something with repetitive motions? Or is there a lot of different moving parts within the sport? After you have selected the test and you perform the test, compare the results with normative or descriptive data to determine the athlete's strengths and weaknesses. If you've got something that's a new test, you always can just run standardized scores within the team, and sometimes you might even need to do it within the position groups if the team is pretty diverse. If there is normative or descriptive data that's already out there, compare against that and see how they're doing. Some studies will have descriptive data, even though that isn't necessarily the goal. For instance, I remember there was a paper done on 6 teams for the counter movement jump, and they had normative data for several variables other than just jump height. So then that would give you an idea. It's like, okay, a softball player should this, a baseball player should be able to do that. So that'll give you something to know is, hey, is this good? Are my athletes good at this, or is this something that we need to work on? I bring this up because you don't want to have your team deal with, you think you're dealing with some freaks, and when in reality, the person you consider a freak might be average on another team. So you want to train them appropriately. So do I need to work on strength? Do I need to work on speed? Do I need to work on power? Do I need to work on a change of direction ability? Do I need to work on body composition? You always need to compare with that normative descriptive data. And if you've had the same team for several years, then you've got that and you know what your athlete should be. Because it's going to vary. It's going to vary based off of playing type. I have had the fortune of coaching under some coaches, being strength conditioning coach under some coaches who would run in, let's just say, the sport of basketball. Some might have the 40 minutes of hell from Nolan Richardson and Mike Anderson. Some might be more along the lines of the sets. Well, the 40 minutes of hell athlete is going to look far different, have a greater aerobic capacity, probably a little bit lower body mass, probably is going to be not quite as explosive as the person running the sets. And you're just going to have to realize that for whenever you're comparing against norms. If you're comparing against the normative data for the explosive team and you're the more aerobic capacity type, your guys are going to look really poor on the explosive and really great on the aerobic. So you have to know what you're dealing with. Then you're going to need to find out what the primary resistance training goal is. Typically, what are they? Well, improving strength, power, hypertrophy, or muscular endurance. And you're going to concentrate on one training outcome per season, per cycle, if you will. So you need to know what those are. Is it somebody who is big enough and they need to get stronger or powerful or faster? And you don't want to focus on too many goals at the same time. All of the goals for the sport and the position would not be the same. If I have again, I go back to the example of the offensive lineman. I could tell you that we had an offensive lineman at one point at my tenure at University of Missouri who came in at 235 pounds and he was a basketball player. He was very tall and very lanky and wiry. And it did not matter how skilled he was at that point. He was not going to be good until we put mass on him. So whenever we added mass on him, then he became a good offensive lineman and went on to be a starter and spent some time in the NFL. So you need to know what this person needs and when. So if we look at table 17.2 from the text, it tells you what the sports season is, or the period. So off-season, preseason, in-season, postseason. Sport practice, how often they're doing that. Your priority is if it's given to sport or if it's given to resistance training, and what the resistance training goals typically are. So in the off season, you're not going to be doing much sport practice. You're going to be doing a higher priority given to resistance training. What are you going to be doing in the off season in the weight room? Well, typically people are going to start off with hypertrophy or muscular endurance. The muscular endurance and hypertrophy training are pretty similar. What is the difference? As we'll see here shortly, the hypertrophy is a lot of 8 to 12 repetitions, 10 to 12 repetitions, and endurance is looking at that 12 to 20. So there's a little bit of crossover there. And then as you get more toward the end of the off season, you're going to be changing strength and power. Whenever you get into the preseason, there's going to be some increase in the sport practice, and maybe it's just player-led skill improvement. And there's going to be a medium priority given to resistance training because they still need to improve in those capabilities before we move into the season. So we're going to be looking at sport and movement specific traits. It might be strength, power, muscular endurance, and also we could be looking at improving the more of the exercises that fit specifically to that sport or the range of motion, looking at biomechanical, joint angle specificity, muscular specificity, etc. Moving away from more the true general movements to more specific movements. In season, it's going to be a lot of sport practice and very little resistance training. And it says maintenance of the preseason training goal. Actually, my goal is just to keep the athlete on the field. I don't care if we're maintaining strength, if the athlete is sitting on the bench next to me. I want them to be the best player that they can, and we are going to be giving them the resistance training that's going to keep them on the field. If we can maintain whatever we can maintain, is fantastic. Of course, it's a byproduct of it. But the greatest ability in season is availability. And if the athlete's not available, you can't play them, and you can't see benefits of them being on the court or field or track or pitch. So we need to make sure that they're there. Now, postseason, this is usually active rest, so both of them are variable. It's not specific, and honestly, you should, if you're going to be doing a lot of sporting activities, it should be something other than their traditional sports skill. During this period, you're trying to restore and recreate the athletes. You're trying to get them restore the motor patterns that were lost due to the repetitive nature of any sport. Like, oh well, I'm in basketball. I'm doing all sorts of different movements, but you are stuck in certain positions. Look at a defensive stance. The athlete is typically in a quarter to a half squat. Feet are slightly abducted, and they are moving down there all the time. They're not moving below it. They're moving from down there from that defensive position up. So we need to restore ankle joint mobility. We need to make sure that the hips and the knees are nice and well lubricated and they can get into the appropriate positions. And they can do things than other just basketball, so that hopefully they'll be healthy for the next season.